The people of Syria are celebrating today after rebels toppled the decades-old regime. But the future of the country remains.
Celebrations in Syria after rebel fighters led by a terrorist organization toppled the government on Sunday. This comes after decades of Bashar Assad as the leader of Syria. The U.S. labeled him as a brutal dictator in the past. Syrians now hope that things will change in their country.
God willing, in the following days, we will build a new future in Syria. We will not build with just one family that rules the entire country.
The Kremlin on Monday confirmed it granted political asylum to its longtime ally Assad. Russian President Vladimir Putin personally made the decision. The Kremlin didn't comment on Assad's specific whereabouts. Russian citizens welcomed the decision.
He's probably looking for more safe and secure conditions for himself. This is normal when a person is seeking certain safety.
Also on Monday, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin commented on the surprisingly quick fall of Syria's government. Rebels started the latest uprising a bit over a week ago. They first attacked places in northern Syria before advancing to the capital city. The entire rebellion only took days, with multiple cities being taken over in just a short period of time.
I think the entire international community was surprised to see that the opposition forces moved as quickly as they did. And I think everybody expected to see a much more stiff resistance from Assad's forces.
White House spokesperson John Kirby, meanwhile, commenting on Syria's future and who's in charge after the rebellion.
Right now, the rebel groups are in charge of Damascus. Again, yes, HTS sort of was the vanguard here, but they're not the only rebel or opposition group in Damascus as we speak. And I think they're trying to work that out amongst themselves.
Kirby also suggested it's important to make sure ISIS doesn't fill the power vacuum in Syria. This is partly why Israel is striking suspected chemical weapons sites and long-range rockets in Syria. That's in order to prevent them from falling into the hands of hostile actors.
So who might the biggest loser be in the fall of Assad's regime? And how should the U.S. navigate the transition of the emerging government in Syria? Joining us now to discuss the latest developments is Dr. Karsten Wieland, former senior advisor to the UN Special Envoy in Syria. Karsten Wieland, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Karsten, families and rescue teams reportedly rushed to the Damascus prisons to find people that have been imprisoned there under Assad's regime. Talk to us what this collapse means to the Syrian people.
I think what is happening now in these days is a very painful and at the same time a very relieving moment for many Syrians. We have seen the worst atrocities against human beings in our century in the Syrian conflict since the Arab Spring in the past 13 years by the Assad regime. We are seeing 4 underground secret floors of almost no air prison cells under the Sednaya prison that was also named Slaughterhouse. I think this is the beginning of a painful accountability process and a painful process also of a possible accountability on the one side, but also reconciliation on the other side. So there are many societal and political problems and challenges now on the table of the new leader, HDS leader Golani, and the other groups who will be ruling Syria.
So will this power vacuum ultimately lead to more fighting between these rebel factions who ultimately want to control a new Syria after Assad?
Well, I think Golani and the groups that have now called the shots in Damascus, they have tried to do their best not to create a power vacuum or not to let a power vacuum be created. And they have given an amnesty to Syrian army soldiers. They have offered a peaceful transition. They have offered agreements with local groups, also different religious minorities, even also the Kurdish group the groups in the northeast. We have seen also the prime minister that was still in his office, the prime minister of Bashar's time, who offered cooperation and who was kind of in touch with Golani. So there seems to be a willingness to not create a vacuum and to safeguard the state's institutions. I think this is just the opposite of what happened in 2003 in Iraq, when all the Ba'athist soldiers and also civil servants were sacked, and this created a chaos that ultimately strengthened Iran. And that was the beginning of Iran's rise in the region, 2003.
Now, with Hezbollah pulling out of Syria and Russia granting asylum to the Assad family, how does this affect Syria's ties to Iran?
Iran is certainly the biggest loser in this game right now. I think they're still readjusting their and kind of reassessing their losses compared to its economic power. I think Iran has invested most of all states in Syria, into the Syrian civil war in the past years, and is not able to recover at the moment because, you know, this famous Shia crescent that reached from Tehran via Iraq and Syria towards Hezbollah in Lebanon, where arms could be delivered on land, on the land route to Hezbollah. This is now interrupted. And by the way, not only by Syria, it's also the Iraqi government that had said early on in these days that they will not participate in the Syrian war, that they will not lead or leave let these Shia militias go across the border into Syria. So we have actually a destruction of this axis of resistance, as the Iranians called it, in their ideological battle against Israel.
Now, Assad obviously relying very much on Russia. We can see him seeking refuge in Russia right now after the collapse. Talk to us about Russia's stance inside of Syria, why they didn't maintain their position there militarily. Is this a sign of weakness? Does this expose Russian weakness?
I think it does show Russian weakness. Russia that is heavily engaged in Ukraine. They have withdrawn material and staff already in the past 2 years since the war in Ukraine. And they have now also lacked the willingness of defending Assad when the proper Syrian army was not able and not willing to defend Assad, because we also have to see that this was a predatory state of gangs that was kept together by fear. It was rotten from the inside, it was corrupt from the inside, and this was also one of the big weaknesses and one of the secrets of this quick success of the rebels right now. Russia will have also to readjust, and they have already done so. Both Iran and Russia have toned down their wording and are now talking about rebel groups, opposition groups, and not so much anymore about terrorists. So Russia would be probably trying to safeguard the maritime bases in Tartus and the other military base in Hmeimim. So these are the interests of Russia at the moment, and probably trying to get in touch with the new leadership. They have been heavily disappointed by Assad, who had shown such a poor performance. And I had participated as an advisor for years in the Syrian peace process at the UN. And I have seen Russians also being, struggling with Assad and his stubbornness, partially as a very difficult, what I call a high maintenance ally in the political process, but also in his economic performance and his overall political performance.
Arguably the world's greatest user of proxies and most effective user, the Chinese Communist Party. How does China loom over this conflict and ultimately maybe take advantage of the conflict in Syria?
Well, China has backed Assad and Russia without getting militarily involved. It has supported Russia in the UN Security Council, at least with an abstention when it came to Syria. So China has been clearly on Assad's side, but it has, it is perhaps still an acceptable partner or negotiation partner for also parts of the opposition, because it has not been militarily involved. We have seen in the past months and years that China is trying to also become more politically active in the Middle East, not only economically, also with attempts, the celebration of the reconciliation between Iran and Saudi Arabia was held in Beijing, although it was cooked in Baghdad, but it was served in Beijing. So China is probably also waiting how it plays out. And I would still say it has some strategic interest, but primarily also economic interest, that the trade routes are open and then we can start with reconstruction. That also benefits the Chinese companies.
Now, the leader of the main rebel group, HTS, once led al-Qaeda's affiliate in Syria and is now positioning or posturing himself as the figurehead of Syria. The U.S., Turkey, and the UN consider him a terrorist and HTS a terrorist group. How should the United States be navigating this?
Well, the transformation of HTS from an al-Qaeda branch into something new has started years ago. We just didn't take notice because Syria was under the radar for most Western governments. Now we are seeing this transformation happening in great speed. I don't say that we are at the end of this process, and I'm not saying that we don't have to scrutinize HTS further, but we have seen, as I mentioned, a lot of positive signals to integrate other minorities, not to allow collective punishment or revenge or massacres happen in Syria, to safeguard institutions. And everything that Golani said, also international cooperation when it comes to chemical weapons arsenals in Syria. One has to see if these developments in Syria last and if HTS is fulfilling its promises. And then I would say, for the sake of a political and peaceful settlement, you need to include HTS and the northeastern Kurds into the peace process. Both are currently not in the UN peace process because the peace process is based on a quite old UN Security Council resolution.
Karsten Wheeling, really appreciate your insights.
Thank you very much.
Several of Trump's cabinet picks are on Capitol Hill meeting with senators today. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley joins us live from Palm Beach, Florida. Good evening, Jack. So how are Trump's nominees doing in terms of garnering support ahead of these highly anticipated Senate confirmations?
Well, it seems like they're getting a lot of support here, at least from the senators, the Republican senators that are coming out and speaking about it, meeting with them. Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary nominee, met with Senator Joni Ernst for the second time, and in what Ernst called was a productive conversation, and as well as Hegseth said they had a great meeting. Ernst said in a statement after their meeting, quote, "As I support Pete through this process, I look forward to a fair hearing based on truth, not anonymous sources." Now, this is as Hegseth is facing allegations of sexual assault as well as excessive drinking, all of which he has denied. Now, also on the Hill today was Kash Patel, Trump's pick for FBI director, and he met with several senators today. And Ernst said of him that he will bring much-needed transparency to the FBI. We know that Patel wants to reform the FBI, especially when it comes to monitoring Americans, the efforts to do that. And Senator John Cornyn said that he believes Patel will be confirmed. Take a look.
Well, I had a good meeting with Kash Patel, the president's nominee for FBI director. We still don't know what Director Wray's plans are, but eventually I assume that Mr. Patel will be confirmed as the next FBI director. We talked about the importance of restoring the reputation of the FBI as a nonpartisan law enforcement investigative agency.
Tulsi Gabbard, Trump's pick for Director of National Intelligence, was also on Capitol Hill talking with senators and getting much-needed support there as well, like from Ernst, Senator Ernst, who said that Gabbard is a strong and proven leader. Speaking to press regarding the Syrian takeover today by rebel groups, she said, quote, "I stand in full support and wholeheartedly agree with the statements that President Trump has made over these last few days with regards to the developments in Syria. My own views and experiences have been shaped by my multiple deployments and seeing firsthand the cost of war and the threat of Islamist terrorism." Steve.
Now, Jack, President-elect Trump's daughter-in-law, Lara Trump, says she'll be stepping down as chair of the RNC for a possible Senate position. What's the latest here?
Right. So Lara made this announcement earlier today on social media, saying that she was elected RNC co-chair, and she did indicate earlier during an interview with AP that she would consider taking the position of an open Senate seat following Senator Mark Rubio perhaps leaving that position because he was picked as head of the State Department by Trump. If Rubio is confirmed, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis will need to appoint a replacement to fill his seat, which ends in 2028. Several Republican lawmakers have come out in support of Lara Trump, including Florida Senator Rick Scott, Congresswoman Anna Pauline Luna, and Alabama Senator Katie Britt, all of which say that Lara Trump would be the right person for that role.
Jack, Trump laid out more details on how he would ultimately address foreign and domestic policy issues on day one as soon as he takes office. This was during a recent interview with NBC. Tell us what's coming out of that interview.
Right. Well, one thing of note is how the U.S. will continue to go on with NATO. We know that Trump had made some serious changes in his first term with NATO, calling on other countries to contribute more or at all to be part of NATO. And in this recent interview, he said that these countries need to be paying more. Take a look.
I'm not going to protect you unless you pay. And they started paying. And that amounted to more than $600 billion. That's a big thing. Otherwise, they wouldn't even be fighting. They wouldn't have any money to fight.
And Trump also said that he would pardon several people convicted of crimes related to the January 6th Capitol breach on day one of taking office on January 20th. Now, Trump also mentioned that he would work to end birthright citizenship as well as deporting families with mixed immigration statuses so as not to break up those families. He also promised these mass deportations to start with those who commit further crimes, those illegal immigrants who commit further crimes in the U.S. Steve?
Jack Bradley, thank you for that report. Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.